Ladies and gentlemen, hello and welcome to this absolutely power-packed panel discussion on the studios of the future and India's role in it. We could host an hour-long masterclass with each of these panelists on this subject itself. The fact that they've chosen to all sit together, collectively discuss the studios of the future as a panel in itself is a remarkable achievement from the organizers, of course, and I think it deserves another round of applause, ladies and gentlemen. To give you a brief on what we're discussing, which is Indian cinema and film studios, it has an incredible history, isn't it? Most industries actually start from disorganized scratches and then move to more consolidated, organized setups. Indian cinema is the exact opposite in the sense that it actually started with deeply well-integrated studios that had control over distribution, exhibition, production. These were studios that had everyone from spot boy to the superstar of the times in their payroll. These were studios that made multiple films in a year. They had annual slates. And of course, I'm talking about the likes of Bombay Talkies, Imperial Studios,
40s, 50s, and all that.
Yeah, and then of course, there was a decline in the 40s, World War II onwards. So what really replaced that studio system was a more freelancer system, a star system where producers could spend their life's earnings trying to make one film, right? And of course, a lot of that has changed over time as well. And with America, and I'm going to start this conversation with Chuck Rowan. In America, of course, it's still 5 or 6 top studios that control the production line. You've been a producer, one of America's greatest producers over the last 40 years, Chuck. How do you think the American studio system has changed in all these years that you've been a filmmaker?
Well, when I was fortunate enough to start making films, it was the early 80s. Well, I guess it was the early 80s when I actually got my first film made. I pretended to be a producer in the 70s. And back then, most of the studios were in a lot of trouble because they had been making movies with larger budgets, and many of them didn't work. Like the Cleopatra movie with Elizabeth Taylor and Richard Burton was a huge bomb for 20th Century Fox and almost went out of business. And Columbia Pictures also was having a lot of problems, and so they decided to make films with young filmmakers like, Bob Rafelson and Peter Fonda, and they made movies like that, which actually turned out to be big hits. So one of the great things about the content creation business is that you have to be able to change your course, right? And do things that when something's not working, you try something else. And the business itself, right, has gone through changes because when television came out, they talked about that was going to be the death of the theatrical experience. And then when DVDs came out, and before that, videotapes, right, that was going to be the death of the theatrical movie business. And of course, there are those who think that streaming is going to be the death of the theatrical movie business. But as these last few weeks have shown, movie business can be very healthy if we make movies that people want to go see,
right,
as a group experience.
Right.
And I think what's really great as the world evolves with all kinds of creations, that we as filmmakers and producers and content creators have to also change with the times and do things that are going to enhance people's desire to not only stay at home and at the comfort of their own couch, but also realize that the group experience in a movie theater you can't duplicate.
Right. So, Chuck, one of the reasons why I asked you this question also, and it's very relevant to India and India's entertainment scene and the topic at hand, is, when you look at your box office receipts over the years, it'll probably be above $10 billion, right? What percentage of that came from American viewers and what percentage came from outside America? And has the ratio, what's been the ratio like over the years where America became actually global cinema?
Well, you know, there's no question that when I started making films, the international box office was much less than the domestic box office, and I'll call the domestic box office the US and Canada, right? Because if you're releasing a movie in the US, you better be releasing it also in Canada. Back in the 80s, and I'm not saying this with any real knowledge, but the feeling was certainly over 50%, maybe even as high as 60% of the box office at that point in time was US or US and Canada. And I would say that's inverted now, right? But, you know, there are movies that come out and, you know, you find that 50% or more is still domestic. The first Wonder Woman, for example, even though it did over $800 million in worldwide box office, the box office was more 50-50 than 60 or 65-35.
Right. Which is
but as a general rule,
right.
It's now somewhere between
it's
60
it's an inverted situation. And you know, one of the things that people have always said why American cinema, or Hollywood as it were, manages those economies of scale is because they make movies for the world, whereas Indian cinema, for you know however big it gets, it's still Indian audiences mostly and Indian diaspora across the world. Has that changed a little bit in terms of numbers? I'm coming to you, Dinesh, in the sense that when you look at numbers pre-pandemic and post-pandemic, I'll take your example of your own film, say Stree. Stree would do, and you would know the numbers best obviously, but it would be say about 180 to 200 crore. But when you make a Stree 2, it crosses 800 crore. It's the same film in a sense, the same franchise, but it's 4 times post-pandemic. Likewise with Chava, if I'm not mistaken, that was also hitting about 800 crore plus, something that we hadn't seen before. It wasn't common. Does that allow you as a producer an economy of scale where you can actually up your budget? Of course, there's risk, but there's risk in everything.
So I think I'll divide your question into 2 parts. If you look at what Chuck was saying about American films, they have spent time and effort to build an international market. It requires focusing on it. I'm talking about beyond Indians, and it requires money. So we'll need to do that. We don't have that organized. Like everyone says, content is king, but a very wise man told me distribution is God. So I don't think our films reach there, for which we'll have to work on it. Yeah. The second part is the content of it.
Yes.
I think we're in a very interesting space. I think any example that you take of content from a region breaking out in the world first explodes in that region. I think post-pandemic, we're finally getting our act together. You know, we are understanding that stories need to be made for the common man. You take the example of Stree and Chava. I don't think cities come to the theater on Friday, Saturday, Sunday. I'm talking about main cities.
Really?
I think they wait till, you know, all of us here wait to know for sure it's good because it's expensive, it requires time, and we come later. So people in smaller towns are coming in, and in the last 10 years, we are not aspirational to the West. We want stories about ourselves. And we are the only country that has such a rich culture. But we as filmmakers somewhere stopped looking. I think Stree and Chava are examples of stories in our own culture, as local as it gets, and they've exploded. The second step, when films do that kind of business in your own market, is you have the capital to expand. So we are attempting to make, you know, Mahavatar, which is probably the largest film we've ever made, and we want to make it, you know, there is the technology available to make a world-class film.
Right.
And because the films have worked, you are willing to take that risk.
Right.
But then again, we'll have to work on the distribution.
Absolutely.
I think another thing that can help us go international is if collaboration. So just to throw it out there, if in the pre-climax of Stree, for 5 minutes you had Spider-Man, you're going to explode. But is that possible? You know, but every big brand is collaborating. Everybody wants India. So if there is a swap like that, we can go international and they get our indigenous market. So I think it's right there. Hopefully in the next 2 years, we're going to really push it to, you know, change that ratio, because our ratios, except a few examples, are 80-20. So to go there, we'll need to push quality, and we'll need to make our content go global through distribution.
Right, right. Would the same thing apply, Namit, to technology? Because one of the things that people have always said over the years is that the American tentpole looks the way it does is because it has that kind of, global power to sort of power through that kind of investment in technology. Our VFX is not the same level as them because our number of audiences is not the same. Would it apply the same? I know you tried that with Brahmastra as well. You put in the best that you can in terms of the way it looked, VFX-wise, but is that something that would be easier to do when those numbers are much bigger, even if it's domestic market first?
I think technology is ultimately a tool in the hands of the filmmaker. And it comes back to, as Chak and Dinu are saying, about the vision. What is the film that you want to make? What's the story you want to tell? And the greater the vision, the greater the aspiration, that's where technology comes in to really connect that to the world.
Right.
The point of what we are all doing with leveraging tech is to make sure that we give people that experience when they come to the cinema.
Right.
To experience a story, to experience something that is only beyond imagination. That's the power of being in the movie business.
Right.
And the more we leverage that, I think the more...
Right, because there was a point where our VFX looked so substandard, but even in the smallest towns, they're exposed to the best in the world in any case. They watch the same Hollywood movies that all of us do. But when you see a Bahubali, it looks world-class in its own way. Is that something that's possible? Because Bahubali can bring those numbers as well.
Yeah, I think it's not, to be honest, it's not because of visual effects that Bahubali does the numbers it does. I genuinely believe it's great storytelling.
Right.
Because, when you go back and see Jurassic Park in 1993 or you see Bahubali now, it wasn't like they had the greatest budgets and application of visual effects because
it was still storytelling.
It was still storytelling.
Right.
That always transcends everything else.
Right.
What we are saying is the promise to the consumer, the audience that's coming to the cinema, is they know that they will not get a second-tier experience. You're coming for a premium experience. You're paying the money. You're giving your time. You want to make sure that you're going to get the absolute best that's possible.
Right.
So when we get, I'll give an example of a film like Interstellar that we, not just won an Oscar for doing the best visual effects, but when a director like Christopher Nolan imagines that I'm going to show you something that there is no visual reference of in the world, like what happens to light when it travels through a black hole or wormhole does not exist even in scientific journals. So that's when, as a company, as people who created the art form of that experience, we were actually able to show science how this can transcend storytelling can actually help science in that sense. And that's where, you're sort of creating something that you've never seen before. And that, to me, is the power of what technology can do.
Right.
If you can dream it, you can make it. And if you go with that view, then the promise to the consumer is that come in and watch it on the biggest screen in the greatest way that we intend to show it. And then they're coming in hordes and coming back again for more. Because that's a part that I think we're losing in our industry, that we've not been servicing that part of the aspiration of why we go to the movies. And that sort of is where technology can be really helpful in bringing those stories to life.
Not technology for technology's sake is what you're saying.
No, because ultimately nobody wants a tech demonstration.
Right.
Nobody's interested in coming to a 100-foot screen to see how cool tech is.
Right.
I don't think that's what consumers care about.
Right. We'll come back to the studios now.
Sorry, I just want to make one more point.
Please.
So while we talk about that, but there's also tech that's involved in, let's say now, bringing digital actors to life. There's being
AI.
able to, AI is really leading the way in how you can bring actors of yesteryears, people who've gone away, actors of today. Like we can today make Amir be 25 forever.
Amir is 25 forever.
I am 25 forever. What are you talking about?
I thought you just celebrated your birthday a few weeks ago. So, but the point being that that sort of is the opportunity that you now have. That you can bring that's the fidelity of storytelling and technology that is available. And the same applies to how technology is used in distribution.
Tell them what you showed me in LA.
Yeah, so so we did a film called Here, which is Tom Hanks, who everybody knows is close to 70, and we brought him back to his screen age of 25 when he was a very young man. And I think if you see the visuals and the quality of what's been achieved is absolutely unprecedented. So the idea of now keeping someone like that, who's a great talent, in his form of what his fans would love to see and experience is a reality today. So you can use technologies like that to, I believe, do that for the very vast and very rich talent that we have in our country that have tremendous fan following.
I mean, of course, there was The Irishman where they used technology to make Al Pacino much younger in his younger years. They used the same thing with Robert De Niro, but which is very different.
That is much more, like, I would say that's not AI enabled. That's
No, not
actually
at all.
much.
Yes.
Now what we're saying is that the power of the technology is that what we create is AI is actually helping train what we call the models of on which you base your technology on by the actors themselves. So if you make a AI version of Tom Hanks, it's actually made of him. We're not doing an artistic representation of him.
Right.
So we're actually training the technology on what Tom Hanks was and is, and from his expressions to his features, everything is being built on his own data. And that is, to me, the real game changer in how AI can really help make it authentic for the future.
I mean,
You also demonstrated how it happens real time.
Yeah.
So I can be made to look like somebody else live.
And that, so, I didn't want to take over this time in the tech conversation, but yeah, since Amir saw that in detail, so we actually can have, and when I talk about actors that aren't alive anymore, as an example, you can actually have a stand-in actor and have, a digital version of them being put on while you're filming in real time and actually be able to film it like you would film a normal movie.
right. I mean, just a few years back, making Irishman was so expensive that Scorsese had to go to Netflix, and Netflix decided to fund it because theatrical model would not allow it. And which brings me to the other conversation about studios. I mean, we talk about the traditional studios as we always have, but the fact is 2016 onwards, we've had new kind of studios that finance, distribute, exhibit, and of course produce films for their own platforms, and those are the OTT platforms in India since 2016. Lots of Indian content creators or producers, as you would call them, have really taken on well to Netflix's and the Amazon Prime Videos and the Jio Hotstars of the world. One of them is obviously sitting here, Dinesh Vijan. You completely changed the model in a certain sense, where you took on, I think Inside Edge would have been the first web series, as it were, to come out of India for Amazon Prime Video. You did Mirzapur. You were a theatrical production company, and then you became, in a way, a producer for the Amazons and the Netflix of the world. Was that a game changer for you as a filmmaker, Ritesh?
Hi, good morning, everybody. I think, what it did is, it did not change our drive for making films for cinema. That is still there, and if you ask me even now, I would only want to make movies for a theatrical experience. But what it gave you an opportunity, which the streaming platform gave you, is to tell different kind of content, right? You had an audience there which was not watching broadcast TV, but was consuming content from around the world. So you go out there and you could tell stories. I mean, that gave a birth to a lot of new talent behind the cameras, right? Writers' rooms started being set up. You had an opportunity for technical crew to coming on board, which you would ideally not hire them for films, for any, there were various. So there's so much of opportunity created for it. But the main thing, which is whether you tell a story in a theater, the soul, which is the writing, the film, the story, right? I think that it gave you an opportunity of telling different kind of stories. You could have characters which didn't need to end in 90 minutes or 2 hours or 2.5 hours.
Right.
So the entire format is very different where series are concerned. Also, what I think is that there is some benefit. What they did is suddenly what Dinesh was talking earlier about distribution model. Now, today, people have discovered Indian content. Whether, like Amir says, sometimes it's by accident or whatever, at least they're aware. So today, if an Indian film goes outside the diaspora, they're aware of it. The Western audience is aware because your content is available now in 200 countries.
Right. While they're flipping, they'll discover it, right?
Yeah, so I'm saying they're at least aware of, okay, so even if you go out and try, I think today, if you go and distribute a film which is for theatrical viewing and it's outside your diaspora, there is an opportunity for you.
Right, right.
You know,
right.
so I
to
think
go
that's-
global, to go global, also, I think RRR would be a great example of something that came on Netflix in the US. People saw it and then they wanted a theatrical release. And so then it went to theaters in the US, and then of course there was the Oscar story that happened. I'm coming to you, Ajay Bijli. You know, there is a saying that the multiplex industry in India is a one-man industry, and that one man is you. You know, you practically own most of the theaters,
don't agree
screens, and you know, you don't have to agree. I'm just saying it. It's a rhetorical statement.
Check.
But you know, it is true that in your case and in the case of many other multiplex owners, the theatrical footfall has dropped and progressively dropped post-pandemic. And the reason given is the OTT, right? Which is not very different from the reason given in the 1980s when VHS came and people stopped going to theaters. But except that those were single-screen theaters, we didn't know as much. Your stocks also dropped, you know. So it's a hard one for you.
Tissue.
Do you think OTT is responsible for what we're going through right now, and do you think it's a phase?
I think I'm glad everybody's first. I need to talk about the advantages of OTT.
Yes.
And I think Ritesh said something that you know, it's given artists, creative community a great platform to express themselves. Also, the content that got made, the films that got made, TV shows that got made, they get exposed to the whole world.
Right.
So I think even in India, when a lot of shootings were not happening during COVID, people were watching regional films. And when they came on the box office, when cinemas did open, suddenly they were doing well all over. So I think we have to also recognize that it's done a great thing for movie makers and creative community and the consumers, because even the threshold of storytelling has become very cutting edge now. And it's put filmmakers also on their toes that this is what the audiences want now.
Right.
You can't have a compromised, unengaging film now. It needs to be engaging because they've seen the best. So I think that's the advantage of OTT. However, I feel that it's not an either-or platform at all. So when people ask me, and I've been asked this question a lot, that is it eating into our business or something? It depends on how we handle it. If we handle the journey of a film properly. The journey of a film is that it needs to be first monetized theatrically. It must be, because that is still the biggest window. Unless the movies are commissioned only for OTT.
Right.
Okay.
So the originals, that's different.
If they are, that's one journey that should get completed fully. It must get saturated. After a period of time, PVOD should happen, which is pay-per-view. And again, because these people, these amazing filmmakers have spent a lot of money making these movies, and they should be monetized on the second journey. And what happens when you release the movie theatrically, the quantitative and the qualitative benchmark of the film gets set. Word of mouth, people get to know, wow, that's a great film.
Right.
Quantitatively, you get to know the box office collections and the monetizing potential of the film. Then it goes to PVOD, and then it can go to SVOD.
Right.
SVOD is straight away giving something for free.
Right.
I think, so that's how OTT has to be handled. Nothing is wrong with OTT, but it must, in the pecking order, let the film follow that journey, and then OTT should come. What's happened here is that straight away after theatrical, it is going, in 8 weeks, it's available for free, literally for free. So people, post-COVID habits have changed. So suddenly they get to know, okay, I'll wait. And also there was a study recently done by the Global Cinema Federation. People still don't think it's 8 weeks. They still think it's 4 weeks. And they say, oh, it's going to come anyway. So before the word of mouth comes, some movies are released on a platform base. It's a platform release. It takes time for the word of mouth to carry. And you can't straight away have that movie available for free. So I think if we handle OTT well, there's nothing wrong with it. I think the whole ecosystem is going to prosper. Pre-COVID, the global box office chuck was $42 billion. To get into that, how do you recoup?
Where is it now?
It's about 32 billion or something.
Okay.
It still hasn't reached the pre-COVID
that's a lot of
level.
shaving off, right.
And that can only happen if we really handle this entire ecosystem of various platforms. It's good for all stakeholders and even human beings. Forget about the economic rationale.
Right.
It's also very good for us. I mean, we are all, as Aristotle said, social animals. We like to go out. We want shared experiences.
Sure.
So I think...
So I'm gonna come to you, Amir. And this is a straight and simple question. There are two things we've discussed so far. One is OTT versus theater. Where do you stand on it? Second is, how does one expand the reach and the market and the audience of Indian cinema, in particular, in your case, Hindi cinema, not just Indian India, and what's held it back over the years? Ladies and gentlemen, Amirkhan, the floor is yours.
Well, I have always believed that in India, we have very few theaters for the size of the country and for the number of people living in India. We have very few theaters. So just to give an example, and my data is usually wrong, so you correct me. But in India, we have around 10,000 screens. 9,200, so roughly 10,000. In the US, which is 1/3 our population, or maybe 1/4 our population, they have 40,000 screens. So they're way ahead of us, though they have less population. China has 90,000 or 100,000? 90,000. 90,000 screens in China compared to our 10,000. Now, even in this 10,000, half of them are in the south and half are for the rest of the country. So for a Hindi film, typically you have a maximum of 5,000 screens. Our biggest hits over the years, no matter which film it is, has had a theatrical footfall of 3 crore people or 3.5 crore people. Am I saying the right thing? That's what percentage of our population? 1, 2, 2%? So 2% of our population in a country which is recognized as a film-loving country, only 2% of the population watches our biggest hit in theaters. So where is the remaining 98% watching the film? So my belief has always been that we need to have a lot more theaters in India and theaters of different kinds. And there are so many districts, there are tracts of areas in India, vast areas, which don't have a single theater for people to watch films.
So I'm in my office. Huh? I better go to office now.
Yeah. You get to work.
No, you can open those theaters. I mean, who's stopping you?
You know, that's what he's saying. So I feel that one of the biggest issues that we have faced over the decades is just don't have enough screens. And according to me, that is what we should be investing in. According to me, India has a huge potential, massive potential. But that potential will only be realized when you have those point of sales across the country. If you don't, then I just can't watch the film. I can hear about it. For example, if I'm living in the Konkan area, there's no theater there. I can hear about the film. I can see the chatter online, but I can't watch it. There's no way I can watch it unless I go piracy. So in a legal manner, it is not possible for me to watch the film. That's a very unfortunate situation. So the first thing we need to do is we must have more screens. We have a lot more potential for screens in India.
Right. And the second question I asked you, where do you stand in the OTT versus theater debate?
Well, I just feel that, you see, earlier films would come in theaters and then it would, I remember many years back, it would be a year later, it would be on satellite. Then it became 8 months later on satellite. Then it became 6 months later on satellite. So what happens is I have a choice as an audience that, okay, I can watch the film in the theater as it releases, or I can wait 6 months and watch it on satellite. Today, what is happening is that, and I've said this in one place earlier, if I'm selling you this, whatever is in my hand, and we sell so many products in the world, I want to know if any product has this business model. Here is something I'm selling you, please buy it from me, I tell you. Buy it from me for 10 rupees, 100 rupees, whatever the cost may be. And if you don't, I'll come and drop it at your house after 8 weeks. This is the business model we are currently following. Correct me if I'm wrong. Because when a film is releasing, I know I can go to the theater and pay for it, or I can wait for it to come on OTT and I can watch it. I've already paid for it. So, if I have to be very honest to my audience when I'm marketing my film, I have to tell my audience that, guys, my film is releasing. But all those people who are on this particular subscription, on this particular OTT, they've already bought my film. They don't need to come to the theaters. The ones who are not in this OTT, please come and watch my film. This is my communication that I'll have to make in all honesty, which is a very awkward communication. So according to me, that window is too small. That between theatrical and OTT, you're killing your own business. If I tell you buy a Maruti car, and if you don't, I'll drop it at your house after 4 weeks. Why will you buy it? You will say, yes, drop it at my house after 8 weeks. I'll wait. And in a price-sensitive country like India, this matters a big deal. So I seriously feel that you have to, this is something that needs to be looked at, in my opinion.
Right.
So it's just a very funny business model. And then often in discussions that we have, in film, when we meet, we're like, why are films not doing well? Hello? You're telling the audience don't come. That's why they're not doing well. I mean, usually it goes into, but we are not making good enough films. I'm saying that is a separate topic. Whether your film is good or your film is bad, this business model doesn't make sense to me. If I make a very good film, this business model still doesn't make sense to me. So I'm saying irrespective of quality of film, because that is a separate topic entirely.
Right.
Remove that from the business aspect of it. I make a good film, I make a bad film, doesn't matter. What is my business model? Which according to me, currently, it's a very faulty business model, in my opinion.
No, first of all, this is music to my ears. Absolutely. So up stock, maybe there'll be some healthy movement after this. Anyway, no, I was just want to make one point about what Amir said about cinemas. Definitely.
And mind you, I have nothing against OTT. I think as a consumer, it's great. I get to watch thousands of content for a small fee. So it's a great innovation. It's a great platform. I think it should be used well. And as a creative person, I might even want to go straight to OTT if I'm making a long form content. I might decide, I don't want to be in theaters. I want to go straight and offer it to films, the audiences on that platform. I think each platform has its own benefits and strengths, but they should be used well. And, you shouldn't, ideally the pipeline should be smooth, where you're not eating into your own business each time.
No, the only point I was saying was that about cinemas, the number of theaters, definitely there's a dearth of cinemas. But I just feel the gap is not that large, because when you talk about China, we did a bit of a study. So 10,000 locations are there. And India's got about 8,000 locations. So if you just go by locations, so the location gap is not much. Secondly, I agree that regional spread more is towards south. But at the same time, these 5,000 screens have got 1,000 seats each. Whereas the 1,000 screens of a screen of China is 250 seats. So the capacities, so India's got about 40 lakh seats already installed. Shows we play is about 4.5 shows. So you can say about 1,80,000 shows. That's the seating capacity available on a daily basis. And last year, if I give you data, while we need to build cinemas, I agree with everyone, and I think we need to make them very carefully in the pockets where, the cinemas are not available. Last year, 2024, at 134 rupees ATP, all India, because 12,000 crores is our box office, cinemas ran at 16% occupancy. 1/6. Only 88 crore people went to watch movies, as opposed to 1.2 billion. The population of this country was obviously you have frequency of people going out. Yes. So we've had a big fall post-COVID of number of people who are going. So at 16% occupancy, how will the business make money?
How do you, एक यहाँ पे लोग बात कर रहे हैं कि सिनेमास बंद हो रही हैं, लोग आ नहीं रहे हैं, सारे सिंगल सिनेमास बंद हो गए, आप बोल रहे हैं और बनाओ.
Feast and famine नहीं होना चाहिए.
I usually say very strange things.
But also I think what Ajay is saying is that, maybe in certain, because we've been obviously studying this, and there are pin codes, right, where we have data, right, where there is a demand for going to, see what form of indoor entertainment, air conditioned, looking at weather, looking at options and choices we have, and in these, looking at the smaller towns, what kind of options do they have? They don't have too many options. Now, if you build a cinema there, the footfalls there will increase. I think when we talk about China's example of an average, I think now they're at about 25 to 30 screens for 1 million people. We are still at 5 screens to 1 million people. But they opened up screens where there was a demand. Maybe we have 1,000-seater screens, but the demand there in the city is lesser. So I think...
Like, for example, in Punjab, if I'm not mistaken, most of the theaters are in Gurgaon and in Chandigarh. but not in the rest of Punjab. Am I right?
You mean Haryana?
लुधियाना अमृतसर वगैरह में
नहीं है, but I'm saying that there are large tracts in India where you districts. In that whole district, there's not a single theater. So that's where you need to build them, not in the same cities. मतलब दिल्ली में भी और मत बना.
नहीं, मेरा point था consistency of content
थोड़ा
which
हमको माफ कर.
engages. No, I think consistency of content that engages with the consumer is very critical. What we're finding is there's a feast and famine happening after COVID. Either you have movies, like 7 movies did more than 500 crores business. So the demand is still insatiable. Pre-COVID, only 1 movie did 500 crores business, above 500 crores business. So it's just that what's happening is you have feast. Suddenly a big movie comes, hits a jackpot, and suddenly there is a complete famine. So I think if we have consistency and we go back to 32% occupancies that were there pre-COVID, definitely we should have another 15, 20,000 screens in this country.
I'm glad we're having this conversation at a time when, for instance, the most explosive statement made by anyone in the entertainment industry was Ted Sarandos from Netflix, who says that theatrical itself is an outmoded business model. Nobody needs to watch movies in the theaters anymore. Firstly, do you think that's even vaguely true? And of course, none of you think that's even vaguely true, but like, I get to you, Chuck. I mean, is that what America is going through? The fact that, you know, even the stocks of AMC have dropped hugely over time. At the same time, you produced Oppenheimer, and man, the whole world went to watch it. India is that one rare market where Oppenheimer beat Barbie, and we saw 3 AM shows here in this city. You know, all night. There used to be shows all night of Oppenheimer. The last one I saw was 3 AM. Clearly, there is theatrical, but do you think it's dropping though?
You know, I've been listening to you guys talk, and I've been learning a little bit more about what the content creation business and the theatrical business and other forms of releasing, like streaming, etc., is here in India. And of course, this is probably obvious, but it wasn't quite as obvious to me before I came here and talked to you all. Your business is so just inside India, and my business is so around the world, you know? And so the model is completely different. You have a lot of independence in a certain kind of way, right? All of you make movies or content, and you decide how you're going to get it exhibited, sometimes as you're financing it, and sometimes after you've financed it, right? I make movies and content, whether they go on streamers or they go on motion picture, you know, on theaters, and it's usually decided before I even start production, right? Very rarely do I make something where I'm going to go, you know, I'm just going to get it made and then I'm going to decide how I'm going to exhibit it, right? But everything that I do, it starts out with the intention that I want to show it around the world. I don't think that's where you guys come from.
No, we don't. No, you're absolutely right.
Okay? And honestly, what's so great about this whole event is, in my opinion, my humble opinion, you should be looking at the world and figuring out a way of how to get there.
Taking up on Chuck's point, Amir, and also Dinesh, with Hindi medium. Amir, when you made Dangal, for instance, and when we look at the wider world, we seem to only think of the West. But here was a film that you made in Hindi for an Indian audience, but it did greater business in China. And likewise with Hindi medium, if I'm not mistaken, Dinesh, you made Hindi medium here for an Indian audience, and the box office receipt of that film was 4 times in China that was here, and then you made Secret Superstar thereafter, which again, if I'm not mistaken, the box office receipts were higher in China than it came from India. Is that something that you saw as going ahead as the model to follow, is not just India, but also China?
No, no.
Okay.
I haven't followed that, because for me, making a film, the decision to make a film has very rarely connected to its distribution. It's the material that excites me. And then I want to make that. And so I don't think कि यार ये China में चलेगी, or you know, this has potential in China, because with great difficulty I understand what's working in India. So what's working in China, I really don't have an idea. Yeah. But I think Chuck is so right, his observation that we as Indians, we make films for our own audience. And we don't even think of an international audience. Now, one of the reasons is that we have a large and healthy audience of our own. And in different languages for that matter, because India doesn't only make Hindi films, they make multiple languages. And each language has a very strong and vibrant audience. So I think for us, often as filmmakers over the decades, I feel my common sense tells me that because filmmakers were making films for their own audience, they didn't think of an audience outside of India. Also, when you're making a film for the world, then your manner of communication might have to change a little bit. The manner in which you communicate, not the story itself, because I feel the more local you are in your selection of content, the more global you are quite naturally. Because as an audience, when I'm watching a film from a different country, I get, quite mesmerized by discovering how people live there, what is their culture. It's exciting for me. So I think that the more honest you are with where you come from, you actually do end up traveling a lot more. But what happens is that we have not spent time, I think as Indian producers and filmmakers, we have not spent time in trying to create a distribution channel. If we invest our time and effort in trying to create a distribution channel for our films in different countries and different parts of the world, then I think that will start happening. Because we haven't bothered only. Really, we haven't bothered.
So when I went to China to figure out why Hindi medium is done that much, even I was as shocked. So and just to tell you, the film is subtitled, it's not dubbed. So you had 4 times the collection of India and China, and when I went there, everyone kept telling me dongle, dongle. So I was wondering what they wanted a dongle. They call your film dongle, dongle, and it's the most popular film and they kept going on. And so I understood why it did well. So China has a population issue. So they have a problem getting their kid into school. And Hindi medium addressed a point that if your English is not good, agar aapki bhasha saaf nahi hai, to banda bekar ho jata hai. That's the same problem Chinese face. So I feel that there are enough themes, and because the whole world is going from developing to developed, if we find those stories and we build that distribution, our stories can travel. I'm very hopeful about that.
No, for sure. I think, the stories that we have to tell. Now, for example, Lapata Ladies, it's a very loved film. Almost anyone who sees it all over the world loves it. But how do you get it to those people across the world? It's a small film. If you want to release it in the US in a strong manner, then you'll have to have that kind of distribution, that kind of P&A that you want to put behind it. How do you raise that for a small film? So what happens is that if we spend dedicated time and effort in creating that pipeline outside of India, then a lot of films can use that pipeline.
Amir, do you think what Chuck was saying, that because we sell our digital rights in 8 weeks, and the kind of contracts we sign actually come in the way of theatrical releases. So somewhere a certain amount of structure of how we are releasing needs to come into the business for us to actually go international.
No, actually we have to travel. See, if I need to know what's running in Italy or what the distribution system is there and how audiences react there, we have to spend some time there to understand what's happening. Otherwise, how will you create?
Namit, you're trying to release Ramayan all across the world. How are you going to counter it?
I think it's very pertinent what everybody's saying. I think from our standpoint, we are making a story that I believe is meant from India for the world. So to what you said, Amir, it is about being authentic, about our culture and about our characters and our stories. But we are garnishing it with the right mix of talent, technology, and the way we want to go about it is to really make it feel local to people in the world. Again, with the use of some technology, we're trying to make sure that we will be able to localize the film in languages with performance, which means that it should play in English with lip sync, without subtitles or dubbed versions, because
It should be in English.
it should be in English.
In
It
Spain, it should be in
it
Spanish,
should be in Spanish. It should be in Japanese in Japan.
which
So
now is possible because of technology.
because of technology. So we're trying to make sure that we take our stories, maintain the authenticity of the characters and the world that we're talking about, but leverage that in a way that the rest of the world is not being challenged by the expression. Like, that's why, if you think about it, it's only American films that travel to the world. It's not like we're all watching French and Japanese and other films, because the language barrier to me has been a big challenge. While great content will transcend it, but in general, if you want to go en masse, it is a challenge.
Language is a challenge.
It is a challenge, and that happens in our
Today
own
it's
country.
becoming less and less.
But in our own country, if you think about it, until recently,
Yeah.
we watch very few films from the south that are working in the north. It's not like every other film everybody's going and watching in a Tamil
Yeah.
film in Hindi or vice versa. So we have to make that feel much more easy.
Sorry, I'll just add, I think what we've been discussing is that Indian content, though it's so deeply rooted, right? And in terms of like, if it has to work in its origin country for it to be going out there and relating to people, because you have to stay true to your culture and layer the film accordingly. And we are also, most of our films the emotions are very heightened, in our films. But I think coming back to what you just said, what happened earlier, I think the change and the shift of distribution, like earlier in the 80s, North America used to be the biggest market and the international was lesser of the box office. Today, I think with language, yes, it's become, but it's also the distribution network, which is again what Amir said. I think you'll cut a trailer for the UK market, which is different from the US market, of the same movie. I've seen a trailer in the US, and then the communication in UK, though it's the English-speaking audience, is very different.
You talk about Oppenheimer?
No, I'm talking of film. I've seen it. So there is a UK trailer, while a Europe trailer, compared to the North America trailer of the same film.
Right.
So I think the idea is language, yes, will definitely help, but how do you communicate that piece of information and the distribution? It's very important to create that awareness, because the audience there in the West is going into the same AMC and Regal where an Indian film is playing, but they're just not aware of it. But they'll know of a French film, they'll know of an Italian film, they'll know of a Spanish film. So I think the idea being, do they know of Indian cinema? They do. We have to just come to the forefront, and the distribution of it is...
Sometimes you just end up discovering it when you go to those countries. Amir, I had no idea the kind of fandom you had in Turkey until I went to Turkey. And it's one thing to hear Raj Kapoor and 50s, but I meant like current fandom, like literally all your fans there. I've got 2 placards already, time's up, please conclude. But you know what? As I said, this could be a masterclass, an hour long, with each of these panelists. This has been a fascinating conversation, but before I end, I know a lot of these talk fests happen because, people say lots of great things and we get to learn a lot. But this is also organized by the government. It's organized by the Ministry of Information and Broadcasting. It's organized by the government of Maharashtra. We're looking at the future, and anyone can take this particular last parting thought. How is it that you think the government can facilitate the studios of the future and India's role in it?
Well, first let me say that in my experience sorry, can I take this answer? I've been around for almost now 35 years. And in these 35 years, I have not seen any government, and there have been a number of governments, who has ever thought about us. So this is the first time that any government has applied their mind and their emotions and said, let's do something in media and entertainment. Let's make that powerful. Let's let India be a leader in that. Now, whether we finally become a leader or not is that we will see. But the fact that the present government has thought about it and has actually made the effort to announce it and organize it I think it's a huge initiative. And it's a huge opportunity. It's a huge opportunity for all of us as Indian filmmakers across the languages, that for the first time the government is showing interest in us. This is the time. What we discuss today in Waves, a lot of all these discussions will actually finally translate into policies. So this is a dialogue that has just started. I feel this is the first time that this dialogue has started between the film fraternity or the entertainment fraternity. It's not just films. Between the creative fraternity and the government. This is the first time that dialogue has started, I feel. So I think it's a very welcome, start. And this can, with the correct kind of dialogue that we have with the government, we can actually come out with certain policies that have a very deep and far-ranging impact on the business in the creative fields, in the different creative fields.
As you rightly said, nobody knows the future, but this is the present. And if this is the present, I have to say the future of entertainment is extremely safe and extremely sound. Thank you, ladies and gentlemen. It was a fascinating session.
Thank you.